Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see everybody here this evening. It's a weeknight, and we're very grateful that you were able to make the time to be with us for this very special sustainable seafood program that we have during the winter time. So unfortunately, or fortunately, today was a nice warm day, but we did this program, or we're having this program during the winter as an offering, especially because we think most of the time people are stuck inside. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker and explain a little bit about why we're doing this. So this is an opportunity for us, for NYSMEA, to talk about sustainable seafood, excuse me, and its different parameters. By having a guest speaker from New York Sea Grant and also having one of our board members and myself walk you through two dishes and the recipes for them. And we think that you'll enjoy this moment. And then after that, if you haven't had dinner, you might want to go off and make these exact recipes. So let's just proceed with our first speaker. Our first speaker is Michael Ciaramella, a Pennsylvania native, and he holds a bachelor's degree in marine science and biology from Rider University and a master's in aquatic health sciences from the University of Prince Edward Island. His research focused on the nutritional status of American lobsters. Afterward, he taught marine science in the Florida Keys before pursuing a PhD at Mississippi State University, where he studied the impact of stress on farmed catfish. Mike now works for New York Sea Grant and Cornell Cooperative Extension as the seafood specialist. And as a seafood specialist, he develops programs, workshops, trainings, and resources to help the seafood industry promote and produce safe, wholesome, and sustainable seafood and seaweed for an ever-changing consumer market. So we're going to have Michael speak in 1 second. Okay. Okay, Michael, you should be able to.
All right. Thank you, Lisa.
Great.
All right. You guys can see my screen all right and hear me?
Yes, and we could see the show.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Good evening. Thank you, Lisa and Doreen, for inviting me to join you today or this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about some resources that we have available through New York Sea Grant. I'll show you where they are, but really we're focusing in on one set of business card size fact sheets that were developed on sourcing, handling, and preparing safe quality seafood. This is a series set of 3 different topical areas looking at best practices when you're identifying and sourcing seafood, you're handling and preparing those seafoods at home. These were originally developed as a resource or a tool for retail outlets to educate buyers and consumers on how to safely manage and handle these products once they left their door to ensure they were maintaining that quality and ensuring safety. So a lot of these are really geared towards ensuring safety and maintaining the quality of those seafoods. At the end, I'll touch on a couple other resources that are available and guide you as to where you can find more information. So we'll start off with the first set in the series, which is looking closely at more selecting and sourcing the different seafood types as you're in the retail outlets. When it comes to fillets and steaks, which are one of our more commonly purchased seafood products, we look for a firm flesh, moist appearance, translucent, so kind of like looking at glass, a little bit translucent, lots of light passes through, as opposed to when you cook that product, it becomes more opaque and less light will kind of penetrate. Typically with seafood or all seafoods, you don't really want a fishy odor. The fishy odor starts to occur when that product is breaking down and spoilage bacteria are taking over and generating that odor or that scent. So you want to avoid any products that have strong fishy odors. And you also are looking at the counter for nothing that's coming into direct contact with the ice. If you haven't noticed before, most often they're on trays on ice, not actually touching the ice itself, because as that product sits on the ice, that water melts, and the nutrients that you want to get out of that seafood can leach out in that process. So it's very common to avoid any contact with ice when you're dealing with the fillets or steaks. With whole fish, on the other hand, you often do see them in direct contact with ice because they have that protective barrier of the skin. When you're sourcing them for preparing and bringing home, you want to look for bright, clear, bulging eyes, bright red or pink gills, no visible loose slime, firm but elastic skin, so it essentially bounces back when poked or touched, and shiny skin with scales tight against the body for those that are unscaled. Frozen is another great option when you're sourcing your seafood products. The technology for freezing products has advanced rapidly over the decades, and you can have some very high quality frozen product. When I talk about quality frozen products, it's all about the process or method of freezing. Very high temperatures, very quick to freeze those products will result in small ice crystals, which maintains the integrity and quality of that product, reducing the breakage or destruction of cells within that. So when it comes to sourcing and identifying fresh and good quality frozen product, you want to first be looking for packages that are not torn or crushed or open in any way. You want to look for those that are not above the frost line. So that's that visible line of frost that you'll see in the freezer sometimes. So anything above that is more prone to having things like freezer burn or quality defects because of the higher temperatures up there. And the last thing, and most importantly maybe, is don't buy any that are visible signs of frost or ice crystals that appear in those packages. That's a sure sign that that product started to thaw out and then refroze. Your typical freezer at a retail outlet or in your home is not going to have that high quality, fast, low temperature freezing characteristics that's going to maintain that high quality frozen product, right? So that sign of the ice crystals and the frost on the package is an indication that that has deteriorated in terms of, or experienced that temperature abuse, right? That thawing and that refreezing. If you're looking to source molluscan shellfish, so that would be your clams, mussels, oysters. The one thing we always say, and we say this about any seafood products, is you want to purchase from a reputable source. There is no black and white when it comes to reputable source. A lot of times it's knowing your buyer, I think, is the best way to go about that. Asking good questions and making sure they know and have answers to the questions you're asking. References from folks. But ultimately, if you're purchasing from licensed, regulated commercial outlets, those are typically seen as those reputable sources, as opposed to purchasing from the side of a road, unless it's a designated farm stand or fish market. When you're dealing with live molluscan shellfish, you want to make sure that they are in fact alive. So if you see an open shell and you tap it, it should close tightly once tapped. You want to discard any that appear broken or cracked. So they're most likely dead and not good for consumption. If you're purchasing product that's already shucked for you, you want to look for meats that are plump and wet when opened. If you're going to look for live products, so crustaceans can often be consumed live. These are like our crab, for instance. You want to look for leg movement, activity. You want to make sure that they're still alive and active. Same thing goes for purchasing lobster. You want to look for leg movement. You can also look for tails that are tight to the body when they're lifted or removed from the water. They tend to have smooth and shiny shells and orange to red to dark red color, orange red to dark red in coloration. When it comes to shrimp, you want to look for translucent flesh. Again, that light penetration, almost kind of that look of glass, as opposed to that opaque white color that you see once that product is cooked. And again, you want to look for those that have little to no odor, right? The odor is, again, going to be a sign of spoilage and age in those products. We'll now transition into more of the guidance on handling and looking at how you handle these products once you take them or source them from the market. In general, and this does not apply to seafoods, this is relevant to all foods, and anytime you're in the kitchen, it's important to, one, keep clean your hands, your utensils, your surfaces, anything that's going to come into contact with that product. Make sure it's clean and sanitary. Keep it separate. So especially when you're dealing with a cooked, ready to eat product and you have raw product you're then working with, make sure you're not cross-contaminating and contaminating the cooked, ready-to-eat products with pathogens that could be harbored on your products. Keeping cold is always important. Pathogens are what cause illness. Bacteria in general, known as spoilage bacteria, will cause the deterioration in the quality of that product and cause it to spoil. The way we reduce bacterial growth, whether it be pathogens or spoilage bacteria, is ensuring that those temperatures are kept cold to limit the growth that occurs. And lastly, we talk about keep moving, and that means in and out. Once you get that product, make sure you're using it within the allotted time frame. In general, with seafood, we often hear within a day or two. There are some exceptions to that, and we'll explore those as we go through the presentation. So I'll also have some trivia questions on here. So I would open it up for folks to shout out the answer, or I've got the chat open, I can take a look. But does anyone think they know what is refrigeration temperature? I'm looking for a range. What range is considered refrigeration temperatures? So feel free, shout it out, put it in the chat.
Okay, come on, NYSMEA.
Nobody knows what refrigeration temperatures are. Take a guess, any guess. Below what?
37.
Okay, 37. All right, 37 is within the range. Refrigeration temperature is between 32 and 40. So 40 is that cutoff. Above 40, you're outside of refrigeration temperatures. 32 and below is going to be our freezing temperatures, right? So you get to freezing once you get to 32. So anything between 32 and 40 is considered refrigeration temperatures. And ideally, getting it as close to that 32 mark is going to extend that shelf life, prevent pathogens and spoilage bacteria from growing for the longer period of time, and maintain the quality of that product longer. When you're sourcing fresh fish, all right, so these are whole fish, you want to actually pack them gently on ice. Remember, the fresh fish have the skin, they have that protective coating, they can be packed directly on ice, and that's going to help maintain that temperature really close to or at 32 degrees, maintaining that quality. If you're dealing with the fillets and steaks, you don't want them in direct contact with the ice, so packing them in a sealed bag or container and then storing them on ice in the refrigerator is best practice, because again, that's going to get you closer to that 32 degrees. Now, home refrigerators, very rarely are they operating anywhere near that. You're lucky if they're at 40, common for them to go above 40, so it's also good practice to get a thermometer and make sure you're aware and familiar with your home refrigeration settings and adjust those settings if it's not properly maintained between that 32 to 40 degrees. If you're going to be working with live crustacean shellfish, so again, this would be things like our lobster and our crab and potentially crawfish sometimes, you want to plan to cook those the same day. Again, these are living, right? They're crustacean shellfish tend to move around a lot. You don't want them in your fridge too long. So ideally buy them the same day you're going to cook them. Once you cook it, you can store it in a sealed container. You have about 2 to 3 days typically. If you then pick that meat, store it in a moisture-proof bag or container, typically you have 3 to 4 days. I will say that these timeframes are also dependent on your sanitation practices within your home, the cleanliness of your utensils and the work area, as well as your hands in handling these post-cooked products and packaging them for storage. When it comes to live molluscan shellfish, again, these are living, right? So you want to put them in the refrigerator in a dry, shallow pan, typically covered with a moist towel. You want to avoid prolonged contact with fresh water. So really you want to avoid contact with ice. One, because live molluscan shellfish tend to not like those super cold temperatures. This is a case where you're looking for more above 35 degrees. So 35 to 40 is more ideal for these shellfish because they are alive. And because they are marine, you don't want them exposed to fresh water for long periods of time because that will kill them. They often grow in and around the bottom, right? They have lots of other organisms that like to foul and get on the shells of them. So it's best practice to scrub those shells with a firm brush before you go to shuck and cook. That keeps that product clean and makes for a higher quality meal at the end. If you're going to shuck oysters, make sure you're keeping them once shucked on ice and then or freezing them until a later use. If you plan to cook them, you want to cook within 1 to 2 days if it's a soft shell clam or mussel, so they're less hardy, have a shorter lifespan in the refrigerator. However, with hard shell clams and oysters, those hardier molluscan shellfish, you get about 7 to 10 days they can survive under refrigeration temperatures. Again, assuming you're avoiding freshwater contact and you're keeping it probably in that 35 to 40 degree range. If you're working with fresh shellfish, right? So not those live shellfish, we want to store them in a leak-proof bag again, sealed container in the fridge. Depending on the type, you have different kind of shelf life there, again, depending on sanitation practices and the quality of the product that you've sourced. Shrimp, squid, and scallops typically only last 1 to 2 days. Shucked clam meats, you can tend to get 2 to 5 days, and shucked oyster meats a little longer, between 5 and 7 days. Again, dependent on the product itself, where it was sourced, quality of that product, and sanitation practices in handling and preparing them. With storing of leftovers, again, we come back to cleanliness, making sure that we're keeping our hands or utensils and anything coming in contact with that cooked food that we're preparing to store and maintain is clean. You want to make sure that you refrigerate and freeze them, again, in shallow containers. This is going to reduce the density of that and allow for quicker cooling. And also within 2 hours of finishing that product, you want to get it under refrigeration when temperatures are below 90. If you're operating in the summer, you don't have air conditioning and it's above 90 in your home, or if you're working outside in the heat, you want to get those under refrigeration within an hour if those temperatures are above 90. When you go to reheat leftovers or for storing or after storing, you typically want to bring them up to an internal temperature of 165 degrees to ensure safety. Or if it's a liquid product like a soup or stew, you can bring that to a boil to ensure you have a safe reheated product. All right, so we're going to transition into our third and final set of cards, which is looking more closely at preparing and cooking. We're going to start with thawing. So if you're purchasing that raw or thaw or frozen product, right, you want to then thaw it properly in order to ensure a safe product as well as maintain that quality. And there's 3 main types or ways that we talk about when we're looking at thawing. Does anyone know what the best method for defrosting your seafood is?
Defrosting in the refrigerator from the freezer.
Okay, so yeah, refrigerator. So slow in the refrigerator is the ideal method for thawing any food really, but especially our seafood products. That's going to get the best quality product in the end. The other options are in water, cold water, not warm water, right? Or in the microwave. The reason we want to do cold water is because when you're putting that product, if you put that product into hot water, you're going to very quickly warm up the outside of that fillet, but it's going to take some time for that to penetrate and thaw out the middle. So you'll potentially have the outside of that fillet at high temperatures that are conducive to pathogen and bacterial growth, while that product is sitting there trying to thaw out through the center, right? So you could potentially be causing bacterial or pathogen growth on the surface while you're waiting for that product to thaw. By putting it in cold water, you're maintaining more steady temperatures and cooler temperatures on the outside and letting it slowly come to temperature or thaw out. If you do microwave thawing, this one probably has the most downside when it comes to quality of the fillets produced. You want to be very careful and conscious of what you're doing and watching that product. Ultimately, you want to get it to a point where the fish is still icy but pliable. Especially with small fillets, they have a tendency around the edge to start to cook in the microwave when you thaw them. So you'll have the best quality product if you do options 1 or 2. Again, number 1 is ideal. The other caveat or thing to remember when you're thawing out seafood, if you have seafood frozen in vacuum packed bags, make sure you read the instructions on the bag. Most of the time they will say to remove or puncture the bag prior to thawing. That is important because in vacuum packed or anoxic or low oxygen conditions, we have a bacteria called Clostridium botulinum that tends to grow. And under anoxic conditions or low oxygen conditions, it produces a toxin called botulinum toxin. This causes botulism, which is a very potent neurotoxin. So best practice is to cut that product open, expose it to air to reduce the chances of that toxin forming. All right, I mentioned earlier that thawing under hot water can increase temperatures and have them in optimal ranges for pathogen growth. This is called our danger zone. Does anyone know what temperature range is the danger zone?
Below 32.
Nope. So that's freezing. So it's going to be above that.
40 to 140.
Yes, 40 to 140 is our temperature danger zone. So that's the zone in which bacteria and pathogens are going to grow the best and optimal growth, right? So typically the higher you get, the warmer you get, the quicker bacterial growth, although eventually you'll hit that point where you're going to start cooking that product and you'll reduce growth and start to kill those pathogens. So anytime your product is held between 40 and 140, you want to be limited, and that goes for any food. This isn't specific to seafoods. When you come to cooking finfish, we typically look for the fish to flake or separate easily. A good rule of thumb is usually a 10-minute rule, so 10 minutes per inch of thickness. So if you have a 1-inch piece of fish, you want to go for 5 minutes on each side. That should thoroughly cook that fish. But anyone who's an avid cook or spends a lot of time in the kitchen knows that ideally, you're looking at temperature when you're cooking any kind of protein, especially. Does anyone know what's the proper internal temperature to cook seafood to? We'll shout it out or put it in the chat. Let's see. Internal temperature of seafood. Anybody?
Let's see, checking the chat. I see an old answer from Russell, but not for this question. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So internal temperature of seafood, you want to go to 145, right? So it's kind of unique and different. It's not like other proteins where you're often going towards 160, 165. Fish is 145 is the optimal temperature for fish. When you're coming in and cooking shellfish, clams, mussels, and oysters, you tend to cook them on medium heat, and what you're looking for is for those shells to open. You want to cook scallops until they're opaque and firm, and shrimp and lobster typically until it's pearly white and opaque. Again, you're taking it from that translucent color to that opaque, more white, with often an orange or red hint to those shellfish. All right, last we'll talk a little bit about raw seafood. So raw is becoming more and more popular. You'll see sushi restaurants popping up everywhere. You can now buy it in the grocery stores. There's also a surge in interest in oysters on a half shell, so eating those products raw. So ultimately, the question is it safe to eat those products raw? And well, the answer is as long as you prepare it properly and source it properly, then yes, it can be safe to consume those raw. We do say pregnant women, young children, older adults, those who are immunocompromised and have low stomach acidity are individuals who should tend to avoid consuming raw seafood because they're at higher risk of becoming ill upon consuming, because just the nature of the product, because it does not experience any kill step or processing that would reduce or kill any pathogens on it, it is a higher risk product. If you're looking to source seafood, fresh fish like salmon or tunas or things to consume at home raw and making sushi at home, you want to look for previously frozen product that is labeled as sushi grade. Now, I'll say that sushi grade is not necessarily something that is regulated or standardized. There's no common language around what it means to label something as sushi grade. However, if a person is marketing that product as sushi grade, they're intending it to be consumed raw and likely took extra precautions in the processing and handling of that product to ensure it was safe for that intended purpose. Whereas somebody who's intending their product to be cooked, they wouldn't legally be required to put some controls in place for pathogens that wouldn't be a food safety risk if that product was intended for cooking. And the other main product we consume raw regularly would be oysters. With that, it's always looking for reputable source, making sure it's coming from clean, open, approved waters. You can ask your suppliers to see the shellfish tags when you're purchasing oysters. Those are required by law to come with those bags of oysters. If your supplier doesn't know what you're talking about, I'd find a new supplier. So those are best practices when it comes to consuming those products raw, which can and is done safely on a daily basis. So before we jump and move on to the next portion, I want to touch on a couple other resources that are available. I focus mostly on the handling, preparing, and selecting of seafoods and the resources we have available to that. We also have quite a few resources on nutrition. So if you want to know about nutritional content of various common seafoods and also those commonly caught here or locally caught here in New York, we have a variety of nutrition cards. On the front, it has the nutrition information. On the back, it has additional links where you can find more nutrition information for different species as well as other food products. The Seafood and You pamphlet has a lot of information of commonly asked questions regarding different food safety hazards and risks associated with seafoods. As New York State Marine Educators Association, I thought you might be interested in 2 curricula we have available. One is on seafood science that goes into seafood science in general, as well as has a complementary lesson plan. that
My friend
features,
Lisa
ooh,
is on a Zoom about cooking
I'm
fish.
sorry, just a moment,
sorry.
just a moment.
Hold on.
there's
yeah,
a lesson
learning.
plan
All
that
right,
has
so you don't want to do the
trivia
honor.
and go fish,
No,
and then an
you're gonna Zoom in
aquaculture.
here.
And then an aquaculture lesson plan that goes into aquaculture and the practices of farming fish, and also has a little lesson plan to go along with that to have the students in the classroom kind of build their own little operation and test it out. So with that, I've got my contact information on the slide here. I've got the Linktree link at the bottom. I will send out this presentation as a PDF, so you can access all those live links easily. That Linktree will take you to the resource cards that I just presented on, as well as a variety of other resources that I didn't touch on today that we have available, some of which more pertinent to industry and producers. So if you're actually processing, those might be of interest. But we will save questions, I think, till the end. So feel free to put them in the chat now, or I'll address them later.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate your talk. Thank you. That was great, very informative. So now we are going to move on to our next speaker. And I'm going to introduce Doreen Johann. And Doreen is part of this next part of this Zoom workshop, which is the cooking session or the cooking demonstration session. So I'd like to give you a little bit about Doreen's background. After graduating college, Doreen worked at the New York Aquarium, taking a temporary position. Through the summer job, she met Dr. George Ruggieri, who took the time to meet with her. One day, he saw her doodling and asked if she wanted to illustrate a book, The Mariner's Guide to Oceanography. Features her line drawings, and she is honored to be in the same book as Richard Ellis. For an impressive 35 years, let me see here. Doreen devoted her career to city government, notably at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, rising to the position of Assistant Chief of Drinking Water Quality Control. She spearheaded critical water quality research projects for the agency. Doreen obtained her master's in occupational and public health from CUNY Hunter College, which allowed her to transfer her skills within the Office of Environmental Safety and Health Compliance at the DEP. Now in her well-deserved retirement, Doreen remains an active part of the NYSMEA family and is excited to serve on the board as secretary and get involved in other organizational initiatives. She has found joy in her creative pursuits, writing and becoming a published author, and crafting unique recipes in her kitchen. So take it away, Doreen, and let me give you co-host accessibility. Okay. Oh. Okay, Doreen, take it away.
Okay, let me just make sure this correct. Okay, so I'm going to get my presentation here. Can you,
Russell, thank you, Russell. Thank you for the applause.
can you see my presentation?
Not yet. Let's
All right.
see.
What am I supposed to do?
Share screen. Make sure your presentation is opened on its own.
It
And
is
then,
open.
and then go back to shared screen. Or share screen.
Okay, and what am I supposed, it says multiple participants can
Or
share.
share screen. And then
Yeah.
click on the document that you opened or the PowerPoint.
Okay, I have it up. Can you see it?
No. So,
Is there something else I'm supposed to do to hit?
okay, hold on. You're in co-host, so you're there. Did
Mhm.
you open it on your own?
Well, you said to go to share. I
No,
went, to-
first you have to open the document on your own, on your computer.
yeah, it's already open.
Okay, then go to share. At the bottom, there's a green square. And a screen should open up. And you just click on the document, and then on the bottom right, it should say something like share. Here it comes.
Okay.
Wait, not yet, but it's coming in. Okay, you're in. Now click, okay. You have all of your slides to the left, and you want the full screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it.
Oh, Doreen, on the bottom, see there's a
I
little
think
thing.
I got it. Can you see it now?
Yep,
Yep.
Okay.
yes, it's good.
All right. So obviously I have my strengths and I have my weaknesses. Okay. So, all right. So, yeah. So Michael, thank you for that great presentation. That I really enjoyed that. So, many of you that know me know that I enjoy cooking. So, what I picked for the seafood recipe tonight is cod. So I entitled the talk Savor the Sea, a delicious dive into sustainable seafood recipes. Okay. So I chose codfish. It is a popular fish, although I do know a lot of people that don't eat it, but it actually doesn't get as much credit as it should. It's a popular fish with mild flavored, and the white meat is very moist. There are 3 different species, Atlantic, Pacific, and the Greenland cod. I won't get into a lot with the sustainability because I want to stay focused on the recipes, but there is an importance to sustainable seafood. Why it matters is it gets into overfishing and the impact on marine ecosystems. And the importance of maintaining fish populations for future generations. And many times when you either go into a supermarket or a local seafood place, you will see this MSC, this Certified Sustainable Seafood certification. The positive effects of sustainable fishing is reducing the bycatch and reducing habitat destruction, and of course, having healthier fish populations and ecosystems. Sustainable cod choices. The one that seems to be the most sustainable is Pacific cod. It's caught in the United States or in Canada. These fisheries have a history of being well managed and have minimal environmental impact. I did mention the Marine Stewardship Council. They are a international not-for-profit organization that sets standards involving sustainable fishing. And one of the things, some Atlantic cod is fine and it is considered sustainable, but not all of them are. So you really have to be careful of that. So unless it's specifically labeled as caught with Poland lines in the United States Georges Bank or the U.S. Gulf of America / Mexico, I want to be politically correct. I'm not sure which one to use, so I included both. So that's just a little background on sustainable cod choices. So now we'll get into some tips for preparing and cooking cod, and this can be applied to other fish as well. So a lot of people tend to rinse fish, which, I understand that some people rinse chicken and other kinds of protein, but you really don't need to rinse the cod, because when you're doing so, you could be exposing and running, bacteria into your sink and expose other things to potential pathogens. So really all you need to do is pat it dry with a paper towel if you do. Of course, you don't want your fish to smell fishy. Michael got into the odor component, but some people are more sensitive to fishy odors, or it may not smell fishy to me, but maybe to someone else it does. So soaking cod or fish in milk can help reduce that fishy odor that may be there. And basically what happens is the protein in the milk binds to the compounds that cause the unpleasant smell, leaving behind a cleaner tasting fillet. And maybe it's just a state of mind. For me, I don't see a big difference. But if you do decide to soak it in milk, then you want to make sure you pat it dry. And you might even choose to rinse it, but again, I would just pat it dry from the milk. Then what I tend to do is I do add a little bit of salt to the fillet. It does draw out the moisture from the fish, and it helps the fish retain a firmer texture for when you want to cook, and it'll help it retain its shape better. Those of you that have cooked fish before know sometimes when you're sauteing it and you go to flip it over, if you don't have the right utensil, it can break off as you turn it over. So this will help. It won't totally minimize it. And then adding salt before cooking also allows other flavors or herbs that you choose to use to penetrate into the fish more evenly. And a variety of seasonings can be used. And I tend to garnish my fresh herbs with like parsley, thyme. It's really a matter of choice. So before I show you my next slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I made my cod. And I will say that after this presentation, I'm going to send Lisa the actual recipe. So if any of you would like to reproduce it, you're more than welcome to. So I actually bought my cod this time from the supermarket. Usually I go to my local fishmonger, but I just didn't have the time today to drive there. So I went to Shop and Stop, and I did choose the frozen package, and it had MSC on it. And, that was good. I read everything. I thought it, according to their instructions. I did everything Michael spoke about, so I'm proud of myself. And I then proceeded to set up separate trays. So one of my trays, I took flour and I put in different spices. I put in cumin, I put in salt and pepper and some thyme, and I mixed the flour together with that. And then instead of using eggs, since they've been so expensive, I decided to use olive oil in another tray, and I put in fresh lemon juice and some melted butter. And what I did, instead of dipping the fish in egg as I ordinarily would do, I dipped it in the olive oil mixture. I did both sides, and then I dredged it in the flour. And then I had a tray ready with parchment paper, and I put the fillets on there. And then I had preheated my oven to 400 degrees, and I put the cod in there, and I cooked it for about 15 minutes. And Michael, I know, did give us that internal temperature of 145. I always check it, but one of the things I also do is I check for flakiness. So if I see that the fillet flakes a little bit when I touch it with a fork, I know it's pretty much done. So it's really easy to do. It's just a matter of prep. I find the prep is what takes the longest. So it came out of the oven. I also decided to make some asparagus on the side and plate it. And my next slide is going to show you the finished product. And I'm very happy to say I enjoyed it. It was really delicious. So this was my finished product. And, I garnished it with some leaves and parsley and lemon slices to make it look very pretty for NYSMEA tonight. So it was very easy, very healthy to eat. I minimized the flour. And there you have it. So that was my dish that I'm happy to share with you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doreen. That was great. And it looks delicious. I'm sure you can't wait to have dinner.
Well, I already had one slice, so I couldn't wait. Sorry, I had to eat before the talk.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for your presentation, and stick around because we will probably have questions for you. So let's see. Okay. Okay. And you may want to unshare your screen. Great.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so for our final presentation, I'll just introduce myself. I retired from the American Museum of Natural History at the beginning of COVID. And before that time, well, I had worked at the museum for 36 years in the Department of Education, teaching marine science and other sciences from the exhibition halls. And I ended off my tenure there managing the teaching collection. So that was a very exciting time. Before that, I was in the National Park Service. I was in the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation as a park ranger. And before that, I started my career as a Peace Corps volunteer, and my service was in Chile. And it was in the mariculture of seaweed farming. And the seaweed farming was just offshore. I mean, you could actually go out with scuba, and be able to farm the seaweed, or snorkeling and be able to farm it. But I went out with the very rudimentary scuba gear to try and do that. Anyway, now I'm working and volunteering for NYSMEA and enjoying the programs that we're offering our membership, and this is one of them. So I'll begin by talking about salmon. So today I made salmon with buckwheat noodles and bok choy with a little bit of garni of hijiki seaweed. So I will be able to show you that in a little while. So I just wanted to start off by showing you the salmon that I was using today is a very plump salmon, and this is because it's king salmon, which is the biggest and the fattiest salmon that you can purchase, and that's out there among the species of salmon. So we have 5 species of salmon that are in North American waters, and they are Chinook, which is the king I just showed you, pink, sockeye, coho, and chum. We'll get back to those in a minute. So all of the salmon species are best choice salmons, and you can find them in the Seafood Watch put out by the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And this nifty little pamphlet shows you the best choices, the good alternatives, and what to avoid. And so you might want to order this from the Monterey Bay Aquarium, or go online. They have it online as well. This is great. And if you take it to restaurants, you're sure to sort of, let the chef know that you understand fish choices or best fish choices, and you'd like to know what exactly is on the menu. They may tell you, they may not tell you, but it's always good to ask so you know what you're eating. It's likely, but not the rule, that the salmon that you're eating in restaurants, it's so plump and high that it's possible that it's farmed salmon compared to the other salmons that are out there, and the other ones that I'm going to show you in a moment. So as Doreen just mentioned, all the salmons are certified by the Marine Stewardship Council. And here you could see on the can of pink salmon, that logo, that all-important logo. So you want to look for that whenever you're shopping for any kind of salmon. And you want to be able to see what's on the labeling in the grocery store. Today, we have more labeling than we had in the past, and usually you might see wild or farmed. The salmon up by Alaska is not farmed, and Alaska doesn't allow salmon to be farmed in its own waters. As I said, the largest is king salmon, and it's a very fatty salmon, and the flavor of king will differ from wherever it was spawned and whatever river it was spawned in, which is kind of unique. So you can have different flavors among the king salmon, at least. You can't say that about chicken. A lot of recipes involve bringing taste and flavor to chicken, but fish, all fish have their unique flavors. The pink salmon, which I have right here, this is the packaging that I picked up in I either shop in Acme or Trader Joe's, for frozen, and then I go to H Mart, a giant Korean grocery for fresh fish. So this is pink salmon, and that looks like this, and I'm going to tell you why it's so orangey. And this is what the skin looks like, but this is very orangey compared to the sockeye salmon. You can see a little bit here. And the sockeye salmon is a little less orangey. And why is that? Because, I'm sorry, I have that reversed. It's the sockeye salmon that's more orangey. So switch the fish I just showed you. And the reason for that is because the sockeye eats krill and crustaceans, jointed animals in the ocean that have no backbones. And if they have a lot of orange type of chemicals in their own bodies, that gets transferred to the salmon. So the sockeye is usually a much redder flesh. So when you go to the market, you're going to look for that if you want sockeye. It's delicious, it's fatty, and it has the most omega fatty acids than all the other salmon. So even though the king salmon is the fattiest, the sockeye has the most fatty acids. The coho comes in next, and the chum is the least valuable commercially. So you might see that kind of salmon in canned salmon. When should you buy salmon? Well, the season for salmon is sometime between mid-April to mid-October, with a lot of overlap in different species. So if you're interested in having a particular type of salmon, most of the time, it's probably going to be the frozen salmon that you'll need to look for. That frozen salmon is available all year long because the salmon is frozen out at sea aboard ship, as opposed to fresh salmon that has to be flown into places. So one of the things you want to look for, which I'm just going to show you on my phone here, is when you're looking for freshness in salmon or fish in general. Michael already mentioned a few of the things that we need to look for. Some of the other things are a very clear, bright eyes that are not sunken, and gills that are red, dark red, not pale red going to gray. And if you see any of that, you don't want to buy those fish. They're not as fresh. Another thing to look for, let's see if I could do this without a glare, is little pin bones. And usually the fishmonger pulls those out before you even buy your piece of fish. And sometimes you'll see them being pulled out like for cured fish, cured salmon, you know, like lox, for example. So we don't always get to see that. But if you see that and the bones are really sticking up, and they're not real bones, they're calcified nerve endings. If they're sticking up, it means the fish is old. So you want to be careful. There is a difference between farm fish and wild fish. So wild fish is wild. It's out in the ocean. In farm fish, there's two types of farm fish. One is inshore, near shore, or slightly offshore. The other one is a containment form of farming, which is more, it could be more inland. And it doesn't have to have any association with the ocean. And that tends to be better fish than the fish that's farmed offshore. So the fish that's farmed offshore are packed into cages. They develop disease. They sometimes get loose, or maybe all the time get loose, and so they contaminate other wild fish. Now, when you're shopping, you only see fresh fish versus farm fish. And if you ask them, which farm fish is this, inland or near shore, they're not going to know, and they're not going to be able to tell you. So you have to be able to continuously do your research if you really want farm fish. Farm fish is you know, you have to be somewhat suspicious about it because of the type of feed that those fish are eating on, or the type of fish they're eating. So you have to be very careful because usually I see farm fish labels saying that the fish have been dye injected. And so you don't want those chemicals in your system. And so that's just a cautionary note to be aware of. How are salmon caught? Well, salmon are caught in a variety of ways. One is purse seining, which is a net that goes around a whole school of fish swimming into it, and then it's pulled up by a string, hence the term purse. Another one is trolling, not trawling, is hook and line, and that could be rod and reel fishing or several lines off of the boat. A long line is another way, which can be at the surface or at the bottom, and that's miles of long line with hooks. Gill netting is fish swim into a gill net, and then when they try to back out, their gills get stuck in the spaces of the gill netting. Michael mentioned, the some of the basics for looking at fresh fish. I just want to add that if you buy fresh fish, it leaves a bigger carbon footprint, so it has to be flown somewhere. Versus if you buy frozen fish, it leaves a smaller carbon footprint because it's trucked or shipped or transported by rail, and so it's a smaller carbon footprint. Some of the other issues about catching salmon are that they're caught also by trawling, which is like a giant scraper at the bottom of the ocean. That damages a lot of the habitat and also other organisms that are living down there. They end up dying. One of the better ones, as I mentioned, is long line at the surface. And at the bottom. So long line at the surface, it has its problems because it invariably catches bycatch, which could be sea turtles and dolphins and other unintended fish to be caught. But at the bottom, it's a little bit better, and you might catch halibut and black cod, and there's less damage. This is with long line. So, these are things to be aware of, but it's hard to find out how and what methods are used to catch salmon. One of the things that you could do when you're making your salmon choices or any fish choices is to eat with diversity. So change up your fish. Salmon this week, cod next week, flounder after that, halibut after that. And that'll help the stocks, the fish stocks, if more and more people ate like that. We eat like that for our fruits and vegetables. We try to eat seasonally, and so we should employ the same practice for sustainable fish. Be selective about the seafood purchases, especially wild versus farm, and limit the amount of fish you are putting on your plate. You don't need a pound of fish in one sitting. And restaurants tend to overserve the amount of fish that's really necessary to have in one sitting. Most of us go home with extras. You may have seen wild char in the supermarket or rainbow trout, other related species, and they're also good to change in and out of the with the regular salmon. I just wanted to throw out a little bit more science. So I gave you some body parts. The pin bones are you look at the dorsal part of the fish, and it's on both fillet sides. The eyes and the gills. Let's try a little bit of Latin. So pardon me if I don't quite nail the pronunciation, but Jennifer, I see you're out there. You maybe can help. So for the pink, also called the humpy salmon, it's Ankinkos gorbicha. And for the sockeye red salmon, it's O. nurka. For the chum or dog salmon, it's O. kita. For the coho or silver salmon, it's O. kistich. And for the king, which I just showed you, or the Chinook salmon, this one's onerous. It's O soyicha. So that's our Latin for today. And just want to remind everybody that fish have different flavors and different textures, and to keep that in mind when you're shopping for fish. So let me just change a little bit here, make this a little bit, I don't know if this will affect you, but let's try. So I'm trying to make the, all right, I see it says gallery. But just asking a question, do you all see me on the screen as just, okay, good. All right, so going to put this down a little bit so you can see the dish that I made, which is the salmon and buckwheat noodles and bok choy, and it has a little garni of hijiki seaweed. So basically, this is almost an all-steamed dish. I cooked the noodles, but I steamed the bok choy and I steamed the salmon. And you, Michael and Doreen, were talking a little bit about flakiness. Well, here's a little tool for you to use. In order for the fish to flake nicely, you want to make sure that you don't overcook it. Overcooking means, or you will visually see a white liquid that's coagulating coming out of the fish. You don't want to see that. That's actually the protein in the muscle. You don't want to see that because at that point when you see it, the fish is overcooked. So you want to just go for almost doneness or just doneness. Take it away or out of the heat, put some aluminum foil over it, because fish continues to cook a little bit longer after you remove it from the heat source. And once you do that, you will probably end up with excellent fish. So I just want to show you this fish. This fish is done, and just about the protein material is just about to exit, so it's done. I steamed this with the skin on because I didn't want the fish to become flaky and fall apart for this particular dish, because it wouldn't look good in this dish. So that's the cooking part of it. Now, how do you actually serve it? Well, I made up a sauce, and this sauce is actually a combination of scallions, ginger cooked in a cornstarch slurry, and I added some soy sauce, some honey, and some apple cider vinegar. And I just made it to this consistency so it can be drizzled on the fish. And so how would I actually do that? Well, I don't want to do too much, but I actually want to just do enough for taste and flavor. And so I'm just drizzling it around, but I'm not saturating the dish with this. And you could do as much as you want. And so this brings me to, what did I use to do this? So over here are this is my tools for cooking fish. I didn't use that today, but everyone should buy one of these because this is so helpful to flip fish and move fish around. And it's the best fish spatula around. So the noodles I bought were buckwheat noodles with yam, but you can buy any noodle you want. I like buckwheat, has a little protein in it. And to make the sauce, I used honey. I sauteed the scallions and the ginger in a little bit of sesame oil. And then again, I added some soy sauce. This is tamari, some apple cider vinegar, Bragg's apple cider vinegar. And also I soaked the hijiki seaweed in a little bit of water to soften it up. And that's what I use for the little bit of garni on the dish. You don't have to do that. I just like seaweed and I like the appearance of it. And finally, I already showed you one label on the salmon. And here we have, in big, it says wild caught. Okay, so you may have not noticed that, but everybody is trying to show that they're catching their fish sustainably, packaging it under certain rules and regulations. This one here from Bumblebee is this is a label called Dolphin Safe. Okay, so that's another type of labeling. And then for the sardines here, I actually put a form of labeling, sustainably wild caught. So sometimes you just see it as a type sentence. Sometimes you see a logo from the Marine Stewardship Council or any other group for that matter. And that's what we want to pay attention to, those labels, to make sure we're buying sustainably caught seafood, whether it's canned, whether, you know, okay, now when it's fresh, that's harder, and it doesn't have those labels where you can see them. So you have to ask, you have to, I mean, I've asked fishmongers in Whole Foods to come around the counter with the fish so that I could smell it. I'm sure they didn't appreciate that, but it's my, you know, my right. But also, if they want me to purchase their fish, I want to make sure that it's fresh. Also, you should buy the fish whole, or at least observe them filleting it from the whole fish so that you know what you're getting. And also, you're not getting fish that could be some other type of fish, but erroneously branded the fish you're looking for. You want to watch out for that. That usually happens with sway. I think it's spelled S-W-A-I, and you want to be particularly careful about that fish. There are some fish you should never eat, like snapper and grouper. And those fish carry bacteria or viruses that can cross the human brain barrier. So there are some fish that you want to absolutely stay away from. Tilapia would be another, because we're not really sure about the farming techniques in other countries. And you want to stick with American fish, you know, flounder, halibut, cod, salmon. There is an American, excuse me, an Atlantic salmon, as well as the 5 Pacific salmon, and then there's 2 salmon in Asian waters. So there are quite a few. But at any rate, I just want to hold up the 3 books I used as a resource, and we will send all of our resources to you. The first one is this one. It's called the Sea Vegetable Cookbook. It has 145 recipes, and it has 52 field identification pages. I love this book. I've been using it for about 40 years. The next book is called Good Fish, Sustainable Seafood Recipes from the Pacific Coast. This book is a lot of fun, and it gives you a lot of resources and information on how to handle fish, cook fish, preserve fish. And my last book, this one is from the Smithsonian. It's called One Fish, Two Fish, Crawfish, Bluefish, and it's sustainable seafood cooking recipes. And it has also information, it's packed with resources, all kinds of odd pieces of information that you probably never thought you'd ever want to know about when shopping for fish. And so it's a good read, even if you don't actually need all the information. I want to thank everybody who attended this program today, and also Michael and Doreen for their presentations. And it's just been a wealth of information hearing from them and their work, and also the information that they have shared with us. And I'd like to open it up now to any questions. We can take some. We could start with those that are in the chat. And see who could answer them. So I see the irradiation question. Let me get back to it. Okay. Is sushi fish irradiated? Anybody know the answer to that one?
So I did put an answer in the chat already, Lisa. But I mean, it is possible. The irradiation is approved for use on seafoods and many other food products. I did send a link in the chat as well to the FDA website on irradiation, giving you more information. They are required to label any foods on the market that are irradiated. So there's the little symbol you see on that website that'll show you which ones are irradiated.
Thank you. Thank you. Would anybody from the audience like to ask a question at this time? We are leaving this time period open for that. In case you have burning questions and things you would like to know about when you shop for fish, or just know about fish in general. What do you think of the Trader Joe frozen salmon is our next question. Any thoughts on that one? Okay, I can add to that. It's frozen. So frozen fish is frozen aboard ship. And so you're going to be eating that type of fish all year long, all year, round the year. So you basically, if you're asking about, I don't know what you're asking about. Is it a particular flavor or freshness, maybe?
It's sustainable, right? I'm just asking that's one that you said was sustainable, or?
Yeah, so the frozen fish are all year round, but the fresh fish are more seasonal. So with salmon, the main season is April through October, with overlap in different species of salmon. So you can eat fresh fish, you could eat fresh salmon during those months. You'll know that you're getting it fresh, it's flown in from somewhere. But if you're buying frozen fish, it could have been caught whenever, and then it's been frozen, and you're eating it out of the normal season for fresh fish.
And I'd also add with that one, I'm not familiar with Trader Joe's frozen salmon, but in general, when it comes to sustainability, I put another link in the chat to one of the resources that we had an intern work on a couple years ago that highlights all the different sustainability labels. But what I will say, the caveat to those is, although they're great tools in helping you identify sustainability, you don't need one of those labels to be a sustainable product. Those are very challenging for small local fishermen to get. So if you're purchasing local product, they're very unlikely to have that product, but that label, but it doesn't mean that they're not sustainable. Any fishery in the US is highly regulated to help ensure sustainability. So going with US product it's usually a good bet for ensuring sustainability, or at least efforts are going into addressing those sustainability aspects. So you can look at the source, which it should be labeled on any seafood product in the market commercially, where it's actually coming from.
Right, and I think Doreen had mentioned the Gulf of Mexico, America, earlier, so that yes, I have actually seen some labels not say that, Doreen, but say the Gulf of Mexico on it, or just Mexico, actually. Canada is another one. Norway is another one. And so they are, I would say that commercial entities are making more of an effort, because probably people are more sophisticated, more knowledgeable, and they're asking questions. And so, they're putting out these labels more frequently. If you go to H Mart, which is a large Korean grocery store, they have a huge area of fish, and they don't really fillet a lot of it first. They have mostly whole fish, and you ask for the fish you want, they show it to you. You can even pick through it if you want, just to get the fish you like, and then they will break it down, clean it, break it down, and they have like a menu on top which asks you which way do you want your fish broken down. It's really amazing, versus the culture of Whole Foods, which fillets a lot of their fish, has some fish whole, and it's a whole different shopping experience.
So I had a question. Growing up, I guess in my teenage years, my mother used to make bluefish. Like that was a staple in our house. And of course, over the years, you heard about the high levels of mercury in bluefish. And, as I got older, I would tell my mother, don't make bluefish. And she would get mad at me because I always brought in environmental stuff into our home. But I guess my question is this: I haven't eaten bluefish in years, and I've kind of lost touch. And maybe Michael can answer this question: how safe is bluefish now to eat? What is the status of mercury levels? I'm sure that there are sustainable bluefish, but can you maybe talk a little bit about bluefish in general?
So bluefish, and anytime you're eating more of the predatory species, you have the issue of bioaccumulation, and mercury is commonly occurring. It depends on the type. But ultimately it's exposure and kind of what Lisa mentioned earlier, diversity in your diet. If you eat bluefish every day, every week, for the entire year, you run the risk of overexposing yourself to these contaminants. Incorporating it into your diet every now and then is okay. I'm trying to pull up a list. So what we put out, our organizations will put out consumption advisories based on the levels of mercury that are in products, basically showing how much you can safely eat regularly, or how frequently you can eat them. And here it is. I just found it. So once a month is the most you should be eating bluefish, right? High mercury species like bluefish, grouper, mackerel, tilefish, some of the larger tuna species, right? So depending on the levels of mercury, that limits how much or how frequently you should consume those products. And that will help reduce your risks of exposure to those contaminants. Bluefish, I know, is also a very fatty species, so it's got a very distinct flavor, can go bad very quickly, so it's usually also not a very popular one either.
Yeah, it has a very gamey flavor. And I would also add to that, if you eat fish that are smaller or further down the food chain, you're less likely to eat a fish that has a concentration of some kind of chemicals. If you eat apex fish or fish that are at the top of the food chain, like tuna, you have mercury there, but shark, so you kind of want to limit that. And you also don't know anything about, if any of the species are farmed offshore, you don't really know about the feed, what's in the feed, and if any of that is genetic changing material. So I think that, I agree with Michael. You have to kind of mix it up and not eat the same fish all the time. And maybe not eat too much fish, eat more grains. But at any rate, I think this has been great. And Michael, I've opened up your links to share with everyone later. And if there are no more questions, I want to again thank you so much, and appreciate both your input and your presentations and your seafood dishes. And we hope to do this sometime again. And also thanks to everybody who has attended this evening. It's been great seeing you all. We hope to see you sometime soon. So take care, everybody. Good night. And thank you again, Michael and Doreen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Very
you.
interesting. Thank you.